What is going on, people? It is AOS Reviews here, the Game Penance, back at you with another review. So, if you saw my last video, I did a rant on an episode of Milo's Murphy's Law. However, today I'm going to talk about an episode that I actually like. For every show that I think is just decent or mediocre, I'll be doing this. I'll release a positive review, and then the next day I'll release a negative review, or vice versa. Obviously, in this case, it's negative review, then positive. I explained this a bit more in detail in the last video, so if you want more information on that, I highly recommend checking that video out. But anyways, let's get into the episode. Oh, Jesus Christ, that voice crack. But anyways, let's get into the episode I'll be reviewing today, Sunny Side Up. Great misleads. Throughout this episode, they have a lot of misleads cleverly put in. Some of them are foreshadowed, and some of them are just nicely put in. The best mislead in this episode is when Milo accidentally makes a giant brain break an egg. Whoa! I just realized if you haven't seen this episode, that sounds pretty fricked up out of context. And considering my inside job review, I think my channel is starting to build a negative relationship with brains. Good thing nothing bad's happened to my brain. Then again, nothing bad can happen to something that doesn't exist. Anyway, back to the mislead in this episode. I think one of the reasons this mislead really works is because the whole package is there. It's an important story element. The egg was pretty much the reason the plot existed. The solution here was foreshadowed earlier in the episode with Milo putting the egg in his pockets. The timing on the mislead was really good, and it came at a point where you thought everything was going smoothly. See, the thing that makes these misleads good is that it constantly keeps the audience engaged and keeps the episode full of surprises. Would you rather have a completely boring and predictable 11-minute episode, or would you rather have an episode that is full of surprises and constantly subverts your expectations? Unless you're a worthless grasshopper, you're probably gonna pick the second option. Excuse me, sir, did you call for me? No, I called for a worthless grasshopper, not an Evis Corporation worker. Wait, there's a difference? The next example I want to use isn't necessarily a specific scene or mislead, more so something that constantly happens throughout the episode. Throughout the episode, mainly in the sequence with the constant egg fails, there's a lot of scenes of eggs cracking. That being said, just because they do the same thing over and over doesn't make it stale and repetitive. They constantly change up how the eggs break, and they tell a bunch of different gags and have a lot of fun with playing around with these ideas. I know to call the eggs breaking a mislead is a little bit of a stretch. However, considering the constant variation they have and how you think one strategy might work but it doesn't, I think it's fair to say it can fall under a similar category. And that's another thing that I really like. Not only are the ways the characters try and make the eggs not break creative, but the way they actually do break is pretty creative as well. All in all, this episode just makes the audience believe one thing, then completely flips that concept on its head in a really creative way. Jesus Christ, I think I just broke my neck. Self-awareness. Another thing that really extends the amount of creative possibilities with this episode is the amount of self-awareness this episode had. It's kind of a weird thing to give praise to this episode for, but hear me out. Well, I mean, considering this is a YouTube video and your only choice is to hear me out or click off this video, but analogy lost. The first really good example of this episode being self-aware is the beginning and pretty much the premise of this episode. The premise of this episode is Melissa and Zach trying to work with Milo, a character who is more fitting with the definition of accident prone than I am with the definition of disappointment. Because this episode is extremely self-aware of the plot and its character's flaws, this episode has very little restraints on what it can and can't do. On top of that, it makes the experience for a viewer just a lot better. If an episode was completely ignorant of a character's flaws or character's actions, that would be incredibly annoying as an audience member. On top of that, it really limits the creative potential of an episode. If this episode wasn't being self-aware of Milo's flaws, then this episode wouldn't be able to be written the way it was. Because the writers are very aware and make this episode center around Milo's flaws, they're able to mold the story into something extremely self-aware and entertaining. They keep Milo's screw-ups used at just the right time. They're not used too often, and they don't force the plot around too much, but at the same time, they aren't used only for key story points. They keep an incredible balance here that really pulls this episode up. That's a major thing in this episode that is affected by this episode's massive amounts of self-awareness. But there are even minor things. A lot of the jokes in this episode have a lot of self-awareness too, like the egg puns and Melissa pointing out how painfully awful they are, or the students being really creeped out by their teacher's obsession with her desk. No, actually, I'm not making this up. It's in the episode. I don't fricking know why, but it's in there. A lot of these jokes tend to have some level of self-awareness or character that plays a straight man role that actually makes these jokes pretty funny. Minus the desk joke. That was just a little fricked up for my liking. Then again, considering the fricked up things in my search history, I'm not one to talk. But let's close out of that before the FBI sees. Nothing to see here, no evidence, just stupid wacky pinheads, ha ha ha. Progression. Obviously the meat of this episode and the main bulk of it is Melissa, Milo, and Zach trying to get the freaking egg to not crack. And I can safely say, yeah, the episode has a pretty good and natural progression. It's nothing fantastic, but it does its job very well. The thing that really works for this episode is that it takes one concept, that being the gang trying not to break the egg, and they build off it until they find a good resolution. However, this episode takes things one step further. They have a good variation and progression within a sequence that already has good variation and progression. Okay, for those of you who did not have a full-on tsunami go on inside of your brains, let me explain. A normal sequence like this in a cartoon episode would just have the characters slowly progress until they get their goal. It's somewhat of a cliche in cartoons and a bit of a pattern I've noticed. Some episodes can pull it off, some episodes can't. However, in this sequence, all of the little details make it amazing. Sure, they have the normal sequence of the characters trying harder and harder, but they have a lot of little details going all around. Milo puts an egg in his pocket to foreshadow the ending. They show several reasons why the machines won't work, and it all leads up to the real solution. And even at that, they don't just say, oh wow, problem solved, episode over. No, they still have an action-packed and well built up and progressed climax. Things still go wrong, but the climax shows how hard the characters worked and how far the characters got. The progression was very apparent in the ending, and it did a great job of just wrapping up the episode. Simple but effective plot. The title of this next point just says it all. This plot was very simple, but it worked very well for a couple reasons. Firstly, like I briefly mentioned in the last point, there were just a lot of little details and little jokes and little sequences in this episode that keep it entertaining. However, since I already opened my stupid pinhead mouth and spewed words about that, let's move on. I think the main thing that makes this simple plot work is that they just keep it to the main details and the premise and just roll with it. A lot of episodes try to make a freaking overly complicated approach with subplots and stuff that they really don't need and just try to stay simple at the same time, and it turns out to be a complete freaking train wreck. I mean, a good example of what I just said is the previous episode I reviewed. There really isn't much to say with this point. This episode just keeps a nice flow that it can get away with being simple. Criticisms. This episode was overall really solid, and it was very difficult to find some things I actually didn't like about it. But I guess the one thing that really comes to mind when I think of criticisms for this episode is the Melissa's grades thing. They didn't treat Melissa's grades getting dropped like a huge threat, but at the same time, it kind of seemed like they wanted to make it a threat. There's like 3 lines of dialogue about it, and that really could have been built up more. I actually would have liked this episode more if they fixed this problem and they actually made it a big threat. It would have set the stakes higher, it would have added more tension, more suspense, and it just would have been a better episode. Conclusion. In conclusion, this episode is just an 11-minute jammed packed with jokes and entertaining sequences. This episode wasn't really that funny, but there are some good jokes, and I think a better way to describe it is amusing or entertaining. This episode just sets up its premise, picks a simple and effective plot, and focuses on the minor details to amuse its audience. That is gonna do it for this review. Please like this video and subscribe to both this channel and my second channel, linked in the description below. Please check out all my social media linked in the description below, and if it's reviews, sign the frick out!
What is up, mother? Leafy here. So I found this video that literally gave me a brain tumor, right? Like, I'm not you. There's a channel called something like Anus Reviews or something, and he made a video called Brett Venom HD Rant, and we're gonna watch it. So sit back, relax, grab some lotion, get ready to rub it all over your and let's get into it. Play it!
What is going on, my people? It is Air's Reviews here, the Game Pinheads, back at you with another review.
This is literally a 20-year-old man in his 30s talking about a children's cartoon on a social media website. This one motherfucker wearing sunglasses probably because he has AIDS or something. Literally cancer. Like, I cannot literally think of a worse person on YouTube than this I hope you slit your wrists while hanging yourself underwater. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video today, guys. Make sure to leave it a thumbs up. And if you leave a like on this video, you will receive your very own dog. That's right. If you leave a like, you will get a dog in the mail. This is not a scam. No promises on if it will be alive or not, though. But for real, guys, thank you for watching this video. Can we shoot for 2 million dislikes? And yeah. I will now fade out as my stolen banner with music behind it plays so that this hits the 10-minute mark.